Hey guys, tonight we're stepping through the heavy wooden door of a medieval tavern, where the air is thick with wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the promise of adventurer, at least a decent meal, and somewhere to sleep that isn't a ditch. You can hear the clatter of pewter cups, the scrape of benches across stone floors, and voices raised in conversation, argument, and the occasional drunken song that would make your grandmother blush. Picture this. You're a weary traveller in the year 1347, your feet aching from walking miles on muddy roads that seem designed by someone who clearly hated human ankles. The sun is setting, painting the sky that particular shade of orange. That means you'd better find shelter soon, because medieval nights don't come with streetlights or 24-hour convenience stores. You probably won't survive a night outdoors anyway. Between the wolves, bandits, and the very real possibility of freezing to death, a tavern represents your best shot at seeing another sunrise. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Are you settling in for the night in New York? Starting your morning commute in Tokyo? Drop a comment and let me know. There's something wonderful about sharing these quiet moments across time zones. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tavern before you stands like a beacon in the gathering dusk, its windows glowing amber with candlelight and the flicker of a central hearth. This isn't the romanticized version you've seen in movies, all clean rushes and jovial innkeepers with perfectly white teeth. This is the real deal, a place where survival meets hospitality, where your coins determine your comfort, and where the line between guest and victim can be surprisingly thin. You notice the sign hanging above the door, creaking in the evening breeze. Maybe it's the Crown and Anchor, or the White Hart Tavern, names that speak to loyalty, hunting, and the simple things that medieval people understood. The sign itself is likely painted on wood, showing a crude but recognizable image for the many travelers who can't read. Literacy is still a luxury reserved for monks, nobles, and the occasional merchant who's managed to claw his way up from poverty. The building itself tells a story of practicality over beauty. Thick stone walls at the base, timber and wattle and daub construction above, with a thatched roof that's probably home to more mice than you'd care to count. The windows are small glass, is expensive, and large openings mean heat loss, which means burning more wood, which means spending more money. Everything in medieval life comes down to economics, even the size of your windows. You can smell the place before you even push open that heavy oak door. There's the smoky sweetness of burning wood, the yeasty tang of brewing ale, the rich aroma of meat roasting over an open fire, and underneath it all, the distinctly human smell of people who consider a weekly bath to be either luxury or suspicious behavior. It's not unpleasant. Exactly, it's just honest in a way that our sanitized modern world has forgotten how to be. The sounds spilling from inside paint a picture of life in full swing. There's laughter, but it's got an edge to it, the kind of merriment that comes from people who work hard, live rough, and know that tomorrow might bring plague, war, or just another day of back-breaking labor. You hear the clink of metal on metal, which might be coins changing hands or knives being drawn in medieval taverns. Both are equally likely. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were primarily businesses or community centers. But standing here on the threshold, you can sense that this place serves both functions. It's where news travels, deals are struck, marriages are arranged, and occasionally, where someone meets their end over a disputed game of dice or an insult to someone's honor. The door handle is worn smooth by countless hands, and as you grasp it, you're touching the same piece of iron that merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and thieves have used to enter this sanctuary. There's something profound about that continuity, that connection across centuries through the simple act of opening a door. You push open that heavy door, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight, it's the wall of sound and smell that practically knocks you backward. The contrast between the quiet evening air and this cacophony of human activity is jarring, like stepping from a library into a construction site. Your eyes need a moment to adjust to the dim interior, lit primarily by the central hearth and a few flickering candles that cast dancing shadows on smoke-blackened walls. The floor beneath your feet crunches with each step, covered in rushes that serve as medieval carpeting. These aren't the fresh, sweet-smelling herbs you might imagine. They're a mixture of dried grasses, straw, and whatever else the tavern keeper could sweep up, probably weeks ago. Mixed in with the rushes are the remnants of countless meals, bones gnawed clean and tossed aside, scraps of bread, and the occasional puddle of spilled ale that's soaked into the floor covering. It's basically medieval shag carpeting, if shag carpeting could develop its own ecosystem. The smoke in here is thick enough to chew, rising from the central fire pit and having nowhere to go except up through a hole in the roof, assuming the wind isn't blowing the wrong direction, which it usually is. Your modern lungs, accustomed to filtered air and emission controls, immediately start protesting. Everyone in here has adapted to breathing what essentially amounts to a low-grade campfire, and their life expectancy reflects it. The layout is simple but effective. One large common room dominated by that central hearth, with rough wooden tables and benches scattered around it. There's no careful arrangement here. Furniture gets moved wherever it's needed, and personal space is a concept that won't be invented for another few centuries. The walls are mostly bare timber and stone, stained dark with smoke and time, with maybe a few pegs driven into the wood for hanging cloaks and travelling packs. You notice that the ceiling is low, barely clearing the heads of the taller patrons, and supported by massive wooden beams that have probably been there since the tavern was built. This isn't about creating an impressive space, it's about conserving heat and using the minimum amount of expensive materials. Every architectural choice here is driven by practical necessity rather than aesthetic preference. The lighting comes from that central fire, a few tallow candles guttering in the draft, and whatever dim illumination filters through the small windows. Tallow candles, by the way, are made from rendered animal fat and smell about as appetizing as that sounds. They're cheap, which is why most people use them, but they also smoke, drip, and occasionally set things on fire. The wealthy can afford beeswax candles, which burn cleaner and smell better, but in a tavern like this, you take what you can get. The noise level is impressive for a room without amplification. Conversations mix with laughter, the scrape of benches on stone, the clatter of wooden bowls and pewter cups, and the occasional burst of song from someone who's already made friends with the ale. There's no background music, no subtle ambience, just the raw sound of humans being human in all their loud, messy glory. Your nose is working overtime, trying to process the complex bouquet of medieval tavern life. There's the wood smoke from the fire, the yeasty smell of ale, the rich aroma of whatever's cooking in the large pot hanging over the flames, and the unmistakable scent of unwashed humanity. But there's also something else, herbs, maybe, or the leather of travelling gear, the metallic tang of weapons, and that indefinable smell of old wood and stone that speaks of centuries of use. The temperature is uneven, blazing hot near the fire, and progressively cooler as you move away from it. People naturally gravitate toward the warmth, creating a social hierarchy based on proximity to the hearth. The best seats are near the fire, occupied by regular customers, locals with influence, or travelers with enough coin to command respect. The further you sit from the warmth, the lower your status in the tavern's pecking order. Historians still argue whether the rush-covered floors were actually sanitary by medieval standards, but what's certain is that they were practical. The rushes absorbed spills, provided insulation from the cold stone underneath, and could be swept out and replaced when they became too disgusting, even for medieval sensibilities. Of course, too disgusting is a relative term when you're dealing with people who think bathing might be harmful to their health. The windows, those small openings you noticed from outside, are covered with oiled cloth or thin scraped horn rather than glass. Glass windows are for churches and the homes of the wealthy here. You make do with whatever keeps the wind out while still letting in a little light. During the day, these windows provide enough illumination to see by, but now, as evening settles in, they're just dark squares that make the interior feel even more enclosed and separate from the outside world. This is your new world for the night, a microcosm of medieval society packed into one smoky, noisy, aromatic room where the rules are different, the stakes are higher, and survival often depends on your ability to read the room and the people in it. From behind the organized chaos of this medieval social hub emerges the tavern keeper, and you immediately understand that this person is the undisputed ruler of their domain. Whether it's a burly man with arms like tree trunks or a sharp-eyed woman who could intimidate a Viking, the tavern keeper commands respect through a combination of physical presence, economic power, and the kind of street smarts that come from dealing with every type of human specimen imaginable. This isn't someone who got into the hospitality business because they love people. They're here because running a tavern is one of the few ways a commoner can accumulate real wealth and influence in medieval society. The tavern keeper controls the flow of information, the distribution of food and drink, and most importantly, access to shelter. In a world where being caught outside at night can literally mean death, that's serious power. You notice their hands first scarred, calloused, and constantly moving. They're wiping down a pewter cup with a rag that's seen better decades, but their eyes are scanning the room, cataloguing every patron, every conversation, every potential source of trouble. They've learned to read people the way scholars read manuscripts, because their livelihood depends on knowing who's likely to pay their bill, who might start a fight, and who could be travelling under false pretenses. The tavern keeper's clothing tells its own story. It's practical rather than fashionably a leather apron stained with ale and cooking grease, sturdy wool that can withstand the rigours of constant work, and boots that have seen more miles than most travellers. But look closer, and you might spot small signs of prosperity. A silver pin holding their cloak, a belt with decent metalwork, or fabric that's a little finer than what their customers wear. Success in the tavern business comes with its own uniform. They approach you with that peculiar mixture of welcome and suspicion that defines medieval hospitality. "Welcome, traveller," they might say, but their tone suggests they're already calculating your ability to pay and your likelihood to cause problems. This isn't personnel, it's professional survival. They've seen enough strangers to know that a friendly smile can hide an empty purse or a dangerous disposition. The questioning begins immediately, though it's disguised as casual conversation. Where are you travelling from? Where are you headed? What's your trade? These aren't just polite inquiries, they're intelligence gathering. The tavern keeper needs to know if you're a legitimate traveller, a merchant with goods to trade, a pilgrim with religious connections, or potentially someone fleeing justice. Your answers will determine not just your treatment, but your safety. Behind this social choreography lies a complex business operation. The tavern keeper is simultaneously a brewer, cook, banker, innkeeper, and information broker. They extend credit to trusted customers, hold valuable goods for safekeeping, and often serve as unofficial mediators in disputes. Some historians argue that medieval tavern keepers wielded more practical authority in their communities than many minor nobles, and standing here, you can believe it. The relationship between tavern keeper and customer is built on mutual need rather than customer service as we understand it. You need food, drink, and shelter. They need your money and your guarantee that you won't wreck their establishment or murder their other customers. It's a practical arrangement that strips away modern niceties and gets down to basic human necessities. You watch them move through the room, and their authority is absolute. They settle disputes with a word, extend credit with a nod, and can eject troublemakers with the help of whatever loyal customers happen to be handy. There's no calling the police in medieval times. The tavern keeper is the law within these walls, backed by the collective interest of everyone who wants to keep drinking in peace. The economic calculations never stop. The tavern keeper is constantly balancing the cost of ingredients against the potential profit, determining how much ale to brew, what food to prepare, and how much to charge different customers based on their apparent wealth and desperation. They're running a business in an economy where coins are scarce, credit is personal, and bankruptcy can mean literal starvation. Their knowledge extends far beyond their own establishment. They know which roads are safe, which merchants are honest, which nobles are travelling through the area, and which diseases might be spreading in nearby towns. This information is valuable, and sharing it is part of the service they provide, though the quality of information often correlates with the quantity of your spending. Historians still argue whether medieval tavern keepers were primarily exploitative or genuinely hospitable, but the truth is probably both. They had to be hard enough to survive in a brutal economic environment, but welcoming enough to attract customers in a competitive market. It's a balance that required considerable skill and no small amount of courage. The tavern keeper's word is final here, and as they evaluate you with those calculating eyes, you realize you're not just seeking accommodation, you're negotiating entry into a temporary community where your status, safety, and comfort will be determined by this one person's judgment. It's medieval capitalism at its most personal and immediate. The tavern keeper gestures toward a bench near the fire, and almost immediately, a wooden cup appears in front of you, filled with what medieval people generously call ale. This isn't the crisp, filtered beer you know from modern times. This is a murky, brownish liquid that looks like someone stirred up a puddle and decided to charge money for it. But here's the thing. You're going to drink it, and you're going to be grateful for it. Because in medieval Europe, ale isn't just a beverage, it's often the safest liquid available. The ale has a thin, watery consistency with a slightly sour taste that takes some getting used to. It's what we'd call small ale, typically around 2–3% alcohol content, which means it's strong enough to kill most waterborne bacteria, but weak enough that you can drink it all day without falling over. And people do drink it all day. Men, women, children, everyone. Clean water is a luxury that most communities can't guarantee, so ale becomes the default hydration method for entire populations. You take a tentative sip and immediately understand why medieval people developed such complex spice trades. This ale could benefit from some flavor enhancement, but spices are expensive, and this is tavern ale, not royal banquet material. The brewing process is fairly simple. Barley is malted, boiled with water, fermented with wild yeasts, and flavored with whatever herbs the brewer has available. Hops won't become standard for another century or two, so your ale might taste of bog myrtle, heather, or whatever local plants the alewife thought might improve the flavor. Speaking of alewives, there's a good chance the person who brewed your drink was a woman. Brewing is largely women's work in medieval society, partly because it's considered an extension of cooking and household management, and partly because women need economic opportunities in a world that offers them few legal rights. Some alewives become quite prosperous, running what amounts to small-scale brewing operations that supply entire neighborhoods. The tavern keeper might offer you something stronger if you have the coin and the constitution for it. There's wine, if any has made it this far north, and if you're willing to pay prices that would make your modern wallet weep. Wine is mostly for the wealthy, the clergy, and special occasions. It's a luxury that speaks to social status as much as personal preference. The wine available here probably traveled hundreds of miles, carried by merchants who risked bandits, spoilage, and political upheaval to bring it to market. Then there are the more mysterious options. The tavern keeper might produce a ceramic jug filled with something they call ale with herbs, or medicinal brew, which could contain anything from honey and ginger to combinations of plants that would either cure your ailments or finish you off entirely. Medieval people have a fluid relationship between medicine and alcohol, often combining the two in ways that would terrify modern pharmacologists. You notice other patrons drinking from horns, leather cups, or wooden bowls, depending on their status and the tavern's available inventory. Pewter cups are for the more prosperous customers, while the truly wealthy might rate actual silver vessels. The material of your drinking vessel is a visible indicator of your social position, and everyone in the room takes note of these details. The brewing process itself is part art, part science, and part desperate hope. Without understanding fermentation chemistry, medieval brewers rely on experience, tradition, and luck. They know that certain combinations of ingredients work, that cleanliness helps prevent spoilage, and that proper timing is crucial, but they don't know why. It's empirical knowledge passed down through generations, refined by trial and error, and occasionally improved by happy accidents. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually enjoyed the taste of their ale or simply tolerated it out of necessity. But what's certain is that brewing was one of the most important technologies of the era. Communities that couldn't produce safe, drinkable ale were communities that struggled to survive. The tavern keeper's ability to provide consistently drinkable ale is literally a matter of public health. You might also be offered mead if the tavern keeper has connections to local beekeepers and the honey supply is adequate. Mead is fermented honey wine, often flavored with spices or fruits, and it has an almost mythical status in medieval culture. It's the drink of heroes and kings in the old stories, though the reality is usually less romantic than the legends suggest. The drinking customs here are communal and ritualized. People share cups, toast frequently, and use alcohol consumption as a way of building trust and social bonds. Refusing to drink with someone can be seen as an insult, while sharing a cup creates a temporary kinship that might prove valuable later. Your ale isn't just refreshment, it's a social lubricant that helps navigate the complex interpersonal dynamics of medieval life, where knowing who to trust can mean the difference between a safe journey and a shallow grave. The tavern keeper returns with a wooden bowl and what appears to be a flat, round piece of stale bread that's been hollowed out slightly in the center. This is your trencher, essentially an edible plate that's been repurposed from yesterday's bread because medieval people waste absolutely nothing. The bowl contains a thick, brownish stew that's been simmering over the fire all day, and while it doesn't look particularly appetizing by modern standards, your rumbling stomach reminds you that you haven't eaten since dawn. The stew is a masterpiece of medieval practicality, containing whatever ingredients were available, affordable, and hadn't spoiled yet. You can identify chunks of meat that might be pork, beef, or possibly something you'd rather not think about too carefully. There are root vegetable turnips, onions, parsnips that have been cooked until they're soft enough to eat without losing teeth. Barley or oats thicken the broth, making it substantial enough to count as a real meal rather than just flavored water. The seasoning is minimal but effective. Salt is expensive, so it's used sparingly, but there might be herbs growing wild near the tavern: thyme, rosemary, or sage that the cook has added for flavor. Pepper is a luxury that would cost more than most people earn in a week, so if you taste any, you're eating at a fairly prosperous establishment. The overall flavor is hearty and filling, designed to fuel hard physical labor rather than please sophisticated palates. You eat with a wooden spoon that's been carved by hand and worn smooth by countless previous meals. The metal utensils sitting on wealthy tables haven't made it down to tavern level yet. You make do with wood, horn, or your own knife if you're lucky enough to own one. The trencher bread serves multiple purposes. It's your plate, it absorbs the stew's juices, and when you're finished with the main course, you eat it too, soaked with all those flavors and nutrients. Some taverns offer what they optimistically call fresh bread, though freshness is relative when your bread was baked this morning and it's now evening. The bread is dense, dark, and made from whatever grain was available, wheat if the harvest was good and the tavern keeper prosperous, barley or rye if times are harder. White bread exists, but it's for the wealthy, made from carefully sifted flour that removes all the nutritious parts but creates a product that's considered more refined. The meat in your stew tells its own story about medieval economics and food preservation. It might be salt pork that's been stored since the last pig slaughter, dried beef that's been reconstituted in the cooking pot, or fresh meat from a recent hunt or purchase. The taste is often overwhelmingly salty because salt is the primary preservation method, and medieval cooks haven't yet learned the delicate balance between preservation and palatability. If you're particularly fortunate, the tavern might offer cheese, though it's likely to be hard, aged, and strong enough to clear your sinuses. Soft cheeses spoil too quickly for tavern storage, but aged cheese can last for months and provides valuable protein and fat. The cheese might be made locally by farmers who trade it for ale, or it could have traveled considerable distances, carried by merchants who know that aged cheese is essentially portable nutrition. Vegetables are seasonal and limited to what grows locally or can be stored through winter. Root vegetables dominate because they keep well in cool storage, while green vegetables are rare treats available only during growing season. The medieval diet is heavy on grains and light on fresh produce, a combination that keeps people alive but doesn't do much for their vitamin intake or life expectancy. You notice that portion sizes are generous but monotonous. The tavern keeper isn't trying to provide variety, they're trying to provide calories at the lowest possible cost. The same stew might be served for days, with new ingredients added as needed and the whole pot kept simmering to prevent spoilage. It's efficient, economical, and about as exciting as watching paint dry on a rainy Tuesday. Historians still argue whether medieval people had access to adequate nutrition, but sitting here with your wooden spoon and trencher bread, you can see both sides of the argument. The food is filling and provides enough energy for physical labor, but the limited variety and seasonal restrictions mean that nutritional deficiencies are common. Scurvy, rickets, and other diet-related diseases are regular visitors to medieval communities. The dining experience is communal and functional rather than social or leisurely. People eat quickly, efficiently, and often in silence, focused on the serious business of consuming enough calories to fuel another day of hard work. Conversation happens around meals rather than during them, and the idea of dining as entertainment is still centuries in the future. Here, food is fuel, pure and simple. And the sooner you accept that reality, the more you'll appreciate the substantial, if monotonous, fare that keeps medieval society functioning. As you settle into your meal, you become aware of the fascinating collection of humanity sharing this smoky space with you. Medieval taverns are like social laboratories where different classes, professions, and personalities converge in ways that would be impossible anywhere else. The rigid hierarchies that govern daily life loosen slightly within these walls, creating temporary communities of convenience where merchant and peasant might share a bench, though they'll never forget their respective places in the world. To your left sits a merchant, identifiable by his slightly better clothing and the way he carefully guards a leather pouch that likely contains more coins than most people see in a year. His cloak is wool, but it's been dyed a deep blue that speaks of expense and status. He's traveling with goods. You can see the corner of a pack peeking out from under the table, probably containing spices, cloth, or metalwork that he'll trade in the next town. Merchants are the lifeblood of medieval commerce, but they're also viewed with suspicion because they profit from other people's needs and often know more about distant places than local authorities find comfortable. Across from you, a group of pilgrims huddles together, their staff and scallop shells marking them as travelers on religious journeys. They're sharing bread and ale with a kind of reverent gratitude that suggests they've been walking for weeks, sleeping rough, and depending on charity more often than they'd like. Pilgrims occupy a special place in medieval society. They're theoretically under divine protection, but practically speaking, they're often just poor people with religious motivations making themselves vulnerable to every hazard the road can offer. The local labourers dominate the area near the fire, their position earned through regular patronage and the kind of community status that comes from being known quantities. These are men who work with their hands, carpenters, blacksmiths, farmers, and their conversation revolves around practical matters, weather, crops, local politics, and the endless struggle to make ends meet. Their ale consumption is steady and purposeful, a reward for hard work and a buffer against the harsh realities of manual labour in an age without labour laws or workplace safety. In the darker corner, you notice a figure who might be a soldier, though it's hard to tell if he's currently employed or just another veteran trying to make his way in a world that has little use for his skills during peacetime. His sword is real, not decorative, and he carries himself with the kind of alert wariness that suggests he's seen combat. Soldiers and ex-soldiers are common in taverns. They have money when they're employed, stories when they're not, and the kind of practical experience with violence that makes them both valuable allies and dangerous enemies. A young woman moves between the tables, serving ale and collecting coins, but she's not just a servant. In medieval taverns, the serving staff often have complex relationships with both the establishment and the customers. She might be the tavern keeper's daughter, learning the business, or a local woman working for wages and tips. Her interactions with customers require a delicate balance, friendly enough to encourage generosity, professional enough to avoid unwanted advances, and sharp enough to recognize trouble before it starts. Two men at a corner table are engaged in what appears to be a business discussion, their voices low and their gestures careful. They could be arranging a trade deal, planning a joint venture, or discussing something considerably less legal. Taverns serve as informal business centers where deals are struck, partnerships are formed, and information is exchanged. The lack of formal banking systems means that many transactions happen face-to-face, with handshakes and ale serving as the foundation of medieval commerce. A travelling minstrel sits near the hearth, tuning a small harp and occasionally breaking into song. He's not performing for entertainments, working for his supper, providing the kind of news and storytelling that serves as medieval mass media. Minstrels carry information between communities, spreading news of distant events, political changes, and cultural developments. They're part journalist, part entertainer, and part intelligence agent, and their welcome in any tavern depends on their ability to provide fresh information along with their music. The age range in here is notable. Medieval life expectancy means that anyone over 40 is considered elderly, and you can see the physical toll that hard living takes on bodies. Young people look older than their years, marked by weather, work, and the constant struggle for survival. Children are present too, often helping with tavern work or accompanying traveling parents, because childhood as a separate, protected phase of life hasn't been invented yet. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were genuinely egalitarian spaces or just places where existing hierarchies were temporarily masked by alcohol and necessity. What's clear is that these establishments provide one of the few venues where different social classes interact regularly, creating a complex social dynamic that's part business, part entertainment, and part survival strategy. The conversations around you blend into a constant murmur punctuated by laughter, arguments, and the occasional burst of song. Everyone here has a story, a destination, and a reason for being in this particular place at this particular time, creating a temporary community bound together by shared needs and the universal human desire for warmth, food, and companionship in an often hostile world. As the evening progresses and the ale continues to flow, the tavern's atmosphere shifts from the practical business of eating and drinking towards something resembling entertainment, though the medieval definition of fun might challenge your modern sensibilities. The travelling minstrel you noticed earlier begins to earn his keep in earnest, launching into a song that's equal parts news report, gossip column, and bawdy comedy routine, wrapped in a melody that's catchy enough to remember and repeat. His repertoire includes everything from heroic ballads about distant wars to deeply inappropriate songs about farmers' daughters that would make a sailor blush. The audience participates enthusiastically, joining in on familiar choruses and shouting corrections when the minstrel gets local details wrong. This isn't passive entertainment, it's communal storytelling, where the line between performer and audience dissolves into a collective experience that serves multiple social functions simultaneously. The jokes, when they come, are crude, obvious, and surprisingly universal. Humor about bodily functions, unfaithful spouses, and incompetent authority figures translates across centuries because human nature remains fundamentally unchanged. What's fascinating is how these jokes serve as social pressure valves, allowing people to mock the very hierarchies and restrictions that govern their daily lives. A peasant can't openly criticize his lord, but he can laugh at a song about a foolish nobleman, and everyone understands the subtext. Between songs, various patrons contribute their own entertainment. Someone produces a set of bone dice, and immediately a small crowd gathers around a makeshift gambling circle. Medieval dice games are serious business, combining skill, luck, and the kind of mathematical probability that won't be formally understood for centuries. The stakes might be small, a few coins, a piece of bread, a cup of ale, but the emotional investment is enormous because for many of these people, losing even a small amount represents genuine hardship. A storyteller emerges from the crowd, not a professional like the minstrel, but a local with a reputation for spinning tales. His stories blend history, legend, local gossip, and pure invention into narratives that serve as entertainment, education, and social commentary. He might tell of ancient heroes, recent battles, miraculous saints, or supernatural encounters that allegedly happened just down the road. The audience knows that truth is flexible in these performances, but they don't care, they're hungry for stories that make their own lives seem more meaningful and connected to larger events. The entertainment becomes more participatory as inhibitions dissolve. Someone starts a singing competition, challenging others to remember verses from old songs or invent new ones on the spot. These impromptu performances reveal hidden talents and create temporary celebrities within the tavern's microculture. The carpenter, who seemed taciturn during dinner, transforms into a surprisingly gifted storyteller, while the quiet merchant reveals a beautiful singing voice that transforms familiar songs into something approaching art. Physical entertainment emerges as well, though it's usually more about demonstrating skill than actual competition. Someone might show off their knife-throwing ability using a wooden target, or challenge others to arm wrestling contests that draw cheering crowds and side bets. These displays serve multiple purposes. They provide entertainment, establish social hierarchies, and sometimes settle disputes without resorting to actual violence. The serving staff becomes part of the entertainment, engaging in witty banter with customers, deflecting inappropriate advances with humor rather than hostility, and occasionally contributing songs or stories of their own. Their performance is partly genuine and partly professional necessity, Keeping customers happy and spending requires a certain amount of theatrical skill, and the best tavern workers are essentially part-time entertainers. Religious entertainment isn't absent, though it takes forms that might surprise modern churchgoers. Someone might recite biblical stories with dramatic flourishes that turn sacred narratives into compelling theatre, or lead the group in hymns that gradually become more secular as the evening progresses. The line between sacred and profane entertainment is surprisingly fluid in medieval culture, reflecting a worldview where religion permeates daily life rather than being confined to formal worship. Historians still argue whether medieval tavern entertainment was primarily spontaneous or followed established patterns. But what's clear is that these performances serve crucial social functions beyond mere amusement. They build community bonds, establish social hierarchies, provide outlets for political and social criticism, and create shared cultural experiences that help define group identity. As the night deepens, the entertainment becomes more intimate and personal. Small groups form around shared interests or backgrounds, and conversations become more philosophical, more revealing, more honest. The formal barriers that govern daylight interactions continue to erode, and you find yourself part of discussions that range from practical travel advice to profound questions about life, death, and the nature of human existence. It's in these quieter moments that the tavern reveals its true function as a space where strangers become temporary friends, where isolation is temporarily banished, and where the harsh realities of medieval life are softened by human connection and shared experience. As the evening entertainment winds down and your eyelids grow heavy, the harsh reality of medieval accommodation begins to assert itself. The tavern keeper approaches with a knowing look, ready to discuss sleeping arrangements that will challenge every assumption you've ever had about privacy, comfort, and basic hygiene. The concept of individual hotel rooms is still centuries in the future here. Sleeping space is communal, contested, and often shared with strangers who may or may not have your best interests at heart. Your options depend entirely on your financial status and the tavern's current occupancy. If you're willing to pay premium rates, you might secure a spot in the best room, which typically means a small chamber above the main hall, with an actual bed or wooden frame supporting a straw mattress that's been used by countless previous guests and their various parasites. The bed linens, if they exist at all, are rough wool or linen that's been washed when someone remembered to do it, which might be weekly, monthly, or seasonally depending on the tavern keeper's standards. More likely, you'll find yourself in communal sleeping arrangements that would make modern hostels seem luxurious by comparison. The common sleeping chamber is essentially a large room filled with straw pallets laid directly on the floor, with travelers assigned spaces based on their ability to pay and their perceived threat level. Privacy is achieved by hanging cloth partitions or simply by mutual agreement to pretend the person 3 feet away doesn't exist. The sleeping arrangements follow an unspoken hierarchy that reflects medieval social structures. Merchants and other relatively prosperous travelers claim spots near walls, which provide both protection and a surface to lean against. Pilgrims and labourers occupy the middle ground, while the truly desperate or suspicious are relegated to positions near the door, where they're first to be disturbed by late arrivals and easiest to watch for signs of trouble. You quickly discover that medieval people sleep in their clothes, partly for warmth, partly for protection, and partly because the concept of specialised sleepwear is another luxury that hasn't been invented yet. Everyone keeps their most valuable possessions, close money pouches tucked inside clothing, weapons within arm's reach, and travel packs used as pillows. Trust is a commodity that's earned slowly and lost quickly in these circumstances. The bedding situation is about as appealing as you'd expect from an age that hasn't discovered germ theory. The straw mattresses are home to fleas, lice, and other insects that view human guests as an all-you-can-eat buffet. The more expensive beds might have feather mattresses, but these are even more problematic because they retain moisture, odours, and provide better breeding grounds for parasites. You'll spend the night itching, scratching, and trying not to think too hard about what's sharing your sleeping space. Temperature control is primitive at best. The sleeping chambers are either freezing cold, because heating individual rooms is expensive and difficult, or stifling hot, because they're located above the main hall where heat and smoke from the central fire accumulate. There's rarely a comfortable middle ground, and you'll spend the night either shivering under inadequate blankets or sweating in stuffy air that smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, and whatever the previous occupants had for dinner. The noise level never really drops to what you'd consider acceptable for sleeping. The tavern below continues operating as long as customers are drinking, and sound travels easily through the thin wooden floors. You'll hear conversations, arguments, laughter, and the occasional fight, all accompanied by the constant background symphony of snoring, coughing, and the rustling of restless sleepers trying to find comfortable positions on unforgiving surfaces. Security is a constant concern that keeps many travelers from achieving deep sleep. While outright robbery is relatively rare within taverns, it's bad for business, and communities are small enough that criminals can't easily disappear. Theft is common enough that vigilance is necessary. You learn to sleep lightly, keeping one ear open for unusual sounds and one hand on your valuables. The bathroom facilities, such as they are, consist of a chamber pot in the corner or a trip to the outdoor privy, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds in the middle of a cold night. The chamber pot option means sharing close quarters with the aromatic results of multiple people's digestive processes, while the outdoor option involves navigating dark stairs, finding the privy by moonlight, and hoping you don't encounter anything dangerous in the process. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually slept better than modern populations due to their physical exhaustion and lower expectations. But lying here on your straw pallet, surrounded by snoring strangers and investigating insects, you begin to understand why medieval literature is full of references to the luxury of a good night's sleep. What seems like a basic human need becomes a precious commodity when comfort, privacy, and security are rare luxuries rather than standard expectations. Despite all these challenges, there's something profoundly human about this communal sleeping arrangement that connects you to centuries of travelers who've shared similar experiences. The vulnerability of sleep creates temporary bonds between strangers, and you drift off listening to the quiet conversations and gentle snores of people who, like you, are just trying to make it safely through another night in an uncertain world. The unwritten rules that govern tavern behavior become apparent as you observe the delicate social dance that keeps this powder keg of alcohol, weapons, and competing interests from exploding into chaos. These aren't formal laws posted on walls, they're survival codes that every seasoned traveler learns through experience, observation, and the occasional painful lesson. Understanding and following these rules can mean the difference between a peaceful night and a very permanent sleep. The first rule is deceptively simple. Mind your own business, but stay alert. In a space where strangers are forced into close proximity, privacy is both precious and impossible. You learn to ignore conversations you're not part of while simultaneously monitoring them for signs of trouble that might affect you. The merchant counting his coins tries to be discreet, but everyone knows he has money. The pilgrim praying quietly in the corner deserves respect, but his religious devotion also marks him as potentially naive and vulnerable. Weapons etiquette is crucial and complex. Everyone carries something: sharp knives for eating, tools for their trade, or actual weapons for protection. But there's an understood protocol about when and how these items can be displayed or used. Drawing a blade without cause is a serious escalation that can turn the entire room against you, but failing to defend yourself when threatened marks you as an easy target. The key is reading the room and understanding the difference between posturing and genuine threats. Payment protocols are strictly observed, though they're more flexible than modern transactions. The tavern keeper extends credit based on assessment of character, ability to pay, and social connections, but this credit comes with expectations. Failing to settle accounts not only affects your future welcome but can damage your reputation in ways that follow you to other establishments. Word travels fast in medieval communities, and a reputation for cheating tavern keepers is difficult to escape. Social hierarchy persists even in these supposedly egalitarian spaces, but it's negotiated rather than imposed. A noble traveling incognito might find himself treated as just another customer until he proves his status through behavior, spending, or connections. Conversely, a wealthy merchant might command respect despite his common birth if he demonstrates his prosperity appropriately. Status is fluid here, but it's never absent. The rules around women are particularly complex and vary dramatically based on the woman's perceived status and role. The tavern keeper's wife or daughter commands respect and protection, while serving wenches navigate a dangerous middle ground between hospitality and harassment. Female travelers are rare enough to attract attention, and their safety often depends on establishing clear boundaries early and maintaining them consistently. Information sharing follows its own protocols. News is valuable, but spreading false information or betraying confidences can have serious consequences. Travelers are expected to contribute to the general pool of knowledge about road conditions, political developments, and local situations, but discretion is valued over sensationalism. The messenger who brings bad news isn't necessarily unwelcome, but the gossip who spreads malicious rumors might find himself drinking alone. Religious observances create their own set of expectations. Basic Christian behavior is assumed: crossing yourself at appropriate moments, showing respect for clergy, avoiding openly blasphemous language, but excessive piety can be as problematic as obvious irreligion. The goal is to blend in rather than stand out, whether you're devoutly religious or privately skeptical. Conflict resolution in taverns relies heavily on community pressure and economic incentives. The tavern keeper has ultimate authority and can eject troublemakers, but this nuclear option is rarely used because it's bad for business. Instead, disputes are usually managed through a combination of peer pressure, alcohol-fueled negotiation, and appeals to shared interests in maintaining the peace. Everyone benefits from a stable environment, so everyone has incentives to prevent or contain conflicts. The consequences of breaking these unwritten rules can range from social ostracism to physical violence, depending on the severity of the transgression and the temperament of the other patrons. Minor violations might result in cold treatment or exclusion from conversations, while serious breaches can lead to ejection from the tavern, public humiliation, or in extreme cases, violence that the local authorities might investigate or ignore depending on political considerations. Sleep time etiquette is particularly important given the communal sleeping arrangements. Snoring is tolerated as unavoidable, but talking, moving around excessively, or disturbing others' belongings is considered antisocial behavior that can escalate quickly in the dark when everyone is tired and potentially armed. The unspoken agreement is that everyone deserves rest, and preventing others from sleeping is a serious violation of tavern peace. Historians still argue whether these informal codes were more effective than formal legal systems in maintaining order, but what's clear is that they represent a sophisticated form of social organization that allows diverse groups of strangers to coexist safely in circumstances that could easily become dangerous. The success of the medieval tavern system depends not on written laws or formal enforcement, but on shared understanding of mutual benefit and collective responsibility for maintaining the kind of environment where everyone can achieve their basic goals of food, shelter, and safe passage to their next destination. Understanding these rules isn't just about avoiding trouble, it's about participating in one of medieval society's most important institutions for managing the challenges of travel, trade, and social interaction, in an age when central authority is weak and personal reputation is everything. The economics of medieval tavern life reveal themselves in the complex web of transactions, credit arrangements, and bartering systems that keep this establishment functioning in an age where actual money is surprisingly scarce. You discover that your modern understanding of commerce, fixed prices, standardized currency, receipt-based transactions simply doesn't apply here, where every exchange is a negotiation, and trust is literally worth its weight in silver. The tavern keeper operates multiple currency systems simultaneously, accepting silver coins when available, but more often dealing in barter, credit, and services. Those silver pennies in your pouch are valuable, but they're also rare enough that many transactions happen without them. The merchant at the corner table might pay for his room with a length of fine cloth, while the craftsman settles his ale bill by repairing the tavern's broken shutters. Money exists, but it's just one tool among many in the medieval economic toolkit. Credit relationships are intensely personal and based on reputation, connections, and the tavern keeper's ability to judge character. A local farmer might run a tab through the winter months, settling up after harvest when he actually has income. A traveling merchant with letters of introduction from other tavern keepers can secure lodging and meals against promised payment at his destination. These arrangements require sophisticated risk assessment in an age without credit bureaus or legal enforcement mechanisms. The pricing structure defies modern logic because it's based on negotiation rather than standardization. Your room rate depends not just on the accommodation quality, but on your apparent wealth, your negotiating skills, your connections, and the tavern keeper's current financial needs. A desperate traveler with obvious money might pay premium rates, while a charming storyteller could earn his bed through entertainment value. The same service can cost different amounts for different people on the same night. Regional variations in currency create additional complexity. The silver penny from your home region might be worth more or less than the local equivalent, depending on the reputation of the mint, the silver content, and current political relationships between regions. The tavern keeper maintains mental exchange rates for dozens of different coins, and these rates fluctuate based on supply, demand, and political developments that affect trade relationships. Service charges work differently than you'd expect, with many costs built into the base price rather than itemized separately. Your bed fee includes basic security, fire safety, and access to common facilities, but extras like better food, private storage, or priority seating near the fire require additional payment. The serving staff work primarily for tips and meals rather than wages, creating a complex dynamic where their service quality directly affects their income. Theft and fraud are constant concerns that affect pricing and payment methods. The tavern keeper needs to protect against counterfeit coins, short-changing customers, and travelers who disappear before settling their accounts. This risk is built into the pricing structure, meaning honest customers pay slightly more to cover losses from dishonest ones. It's medieval risk management through collective financial responsibility. The seasonal economy dramatically affects tavern operations and pricing. Harvest time brings traveling workers with money to spend, while winter months might see extended credit arrangements with local residents who won't have income until spring. The tavern keeper must balance current cash flow needs against long-term relationship building, often carrying significant debt loads during slow periods while building reserves during profitable seasons. Information has its own economic value that's carefully managed and monetized. Knowledge about road conditions, political developments, or trading opportunities can be worth as much as tangible goods. The tavern keeper serves as an information broker, sharing valuable intelligence with trusted customers while protecting sensitive details that could affect future business. News literally pays for itself in increased customer loyalty and improved bargaining positions. Labor exchanges are common, with travelers working off their bills through kitchen help, stable work, or skilled services that the tavern needs. A traveling carpenter might build new tables in exchange for a week's lodging, while a literate traveler could earn meals by helping with accounts or correspondence. These arrangements benefit both parties but require careful negotiation to ensure fair value exchanges. Quality control in this economic system relies entirely on reputation and repeat business rather than formal standards or consumer protection. The tavern keeper's long-term success depends on maintaining relationships with travelers, merchants, and local residents who recommend the establishment to others. A reputation for fair dealing and quality service is literally the most valuable asset a tavern can possess. Historians still argue whether medieval commerce was more or less efficient than modern systems, but what's clear is that it required different skills and operated according to different principles. Personal relationships, reputation, and flexible thinking were more important than standardized procedures or formal contracts. Every transaction was a social interaction that built or damaged ongoing relationships. The complexity of these economic arrangements becomes apparent as you watch the tavern keeper juggle multiple payment methods, track various credit relationships, and negotiate prices that reflect not just costs and profits, but social relationships, risk assessments, and strategic business considerations that extend far beyond the current transaction. It's capitalism with a very human face, where success depends on understanding people as much as understanding money. The rhythm of tavern life shifts dramatically with the changing seasons, transforming this establishment from a summer way station bustling with merchants and pilgrims into a winter refuge where locals gather to escape the brutal cold and crushing isolation of medieval winters. You begin to understand that taverns aren't just businesses, they're seasonal community centers that adapt their function, atmosphere, and clientele to match the agricultural and social cycles that govern medieval life. Summer brings the tavern's most prosperous period, when roads are passable and travel is relatively safe. Merchants move goods between markets, pilgrims journey to distant shrines, and laborers migrate to seasonal work opportunities. The tavern fills with strangers who pay cash for services, creating a cosmopolitan atmosphere where news from distant lands mingles with local gossip. The tavern keeper stocks up on supplies, makes repairs, and builds financial reserves to carry the business through leaner months. Harvest season transforms the tavern into a celebration centre where successful farmers and labourers gather to spend their newly earned wages. The atmosphere becomes festive, almost carnival-like, as people who've worked brutal hours in the fields finally have time and money for leisure. Harvest festivals blend pagan traditions with Christian observances, creating extended celebrations that can last for days. The tavern keeper expects to make significant profits during these brief periods of rural prosperity. Autumn brings a different clientele as winter preparations intensify. Traveling traders make final journeys before roads become impassable, while local residents stock up on goods that won't be available during the cold months. The tavern serves as a distribution center for winter supplies, and the tavern keeper often extends credit to local families who'll settle accounts after winter ends. The atmosphere becomes more practical and urgent as everyone prepares for the challenging months ahead. Winter transforms the tavern into something resembling a medieval social club, where locals gather not just for food and drink, but for human contact that helps combat the isolation and depression of the dark months. The clientele shifts from travelers to neighbors, and relationships become more intimate and complex. Regular customers develop running tabs, ongoing feuds, romantic entanglements, and the kind of social dynamics that can only develop when the same people meet regularly over extended periods. The winter tavern becomes a news center where information spreads through the community faster than any formal communication system. Political developments, births, deaths, marriages, and scandals are all processed through tavern conversations that serve as medieval social media. The tavern keeper often knows more about local affairs than official authorities, making the establishment an informal but crucial part of community governance. Religious holidays create their own seasonal patterns that blend sacred observances with very secular celebrations. Christmas festivities might last for weeks, with the tavern serving as the venue for celebrations that would be inappropriate in churches but are essential for community morale. Easter brings spring renewal celebrations that mark the end of winter's hardships. Saints' days provide excuses for local festivals that combine religious devotion with communal drinking and storytelling. The spring reopening of travel routes brings a surge of activity as merchants, pilgrims, and labourers resume their journeys. The tavern keeper prepares for the new season by settling winter accounts, hiring additional staff, and restocking supplies. Local residents who've spent months in close proximity begin to scatter to their various occupations, and the social dynamics shift from intimate community gathering to commercial hospitality operation. Food and drink offerings change dramatically with seasonal availability. Summer brings fresh vegetables, fruits, and the possibility of varied meals, while winter menus rely heavily on preserved foods, root vegetables, and whatever can be stored for months without spoiling. The quality and variety of tavern fare directly reflects the agricultural calendar, with harvest season bringing abundance and late winter, often featuring meals that test the limits of creativity and palatability. Pricing fluctuates seasonally based on supply, demand, and the local economic cycle. Winter rates might be lower to attract local customers who have limited cash, while harvest season allows for premium pricing when customers have money to spend. The tavern keeper must balance maximizing profits during good times against maintaining relationships during lean periods, creating complex economic strategies that extend across multiple seasons. Entertainment also follows seasonal patterns, with summer bringing professional entertainers who travel between establishments, while winter entertainment relies more on local talent and community participation. The stories, songs, and performances reflect seasonal theme harvest celebrations, winter survival tales, spring renewal narratives that help communities process their shared experiences and maintain cultural continuity. Historians still argue whether seasonal variations in medieval life were more pronounced than modern seasonal differences, but sitting in this tavern, as seasons change around you, the profound impact of agricultural cycles on social life becomes undeniable. The tavern serves as a barometer of community health and prosperity, reflecting the successes and failures of harvests, the impact of weather on travel and trade, and the social needs that persist regardless of external conditions. The seasonal rhythm creates a kind of temporal community where relationships deepen and evolve over months and years. You begin to understand that medieval social life operates on longer timescales than modern interactions, where seasonal gatherings, annual celebrations, And cyclical economic patterns create bonds that persist across decades and generations, making the tavern not just a business establishment, but a cornerstone of community, continuity, and cultural preservation. The women moving through this tavern space navigate a complex social landscape that reveals both the constraints and unexpected opportunities available to females in medieval society. Their presence here challenges modern assumptions about women's roles while simultaneously demonstrating the harsh realities of a world where gender determines not just social position, but often survival itself. Each woman you observe has carved out her own niche in this masculine-dominated environment through a combination of skill, determination, and careful negotiation of social expectations. The tavern keeper's wife, if she exists, wields considerable authority within these walls, often managing daily operations while her husband handles external business relationships. She controls the kitchen, supervises serving staff, and makes crucial decisions about food preparation, customer service, and household management. Her position grants her a kind of power that's rare for medieval women, the ability to command respect from men, control economic resources, and exercise authority over a business operation. Yet this power comes with constant vulnerability, as her status depends entirely on her relationship to her husband. The serving women occupy a particularly precarious position, balancing the need to be friendly and accommodating with the constant threat of unwanted advances from customers who've been drinking. Their survival depends on reading men's intentions accurately, deflecting inappropriate behavior with humor rather than hostility, and building relationships with regular customers who might protect them from more dangerous patrons. They're part entertainer, part psychologist, and part bodyguard, using wit and social intelligence to navigate situations that could easily become violent. Female travelers are rare enough to attract attention whenever they appear, and their presence immediately changes the tavern's social dynamics. A woman traveling alone is either remarkably brave, remarkably desperate, or remarkably well-connected, because the dangers of medieval roads are multiplied for anyone who can't physically defend themselves. These women often develop elaborate strategies for appearing less vulnerable traveling in groups, disguising their gender, or cultivating relationships with male protectors who provide security in exchange for various forms of compensation. The alewives represent one of medieval women's most important economic roles, as brewing is largely female work that can provide genuine financial independence. A successful alewife might supply multiple taverns, accumulate significant wealth, and wield considerable influence in her community. The quality of ale can make or break a tavern's reputation, giving skilled brewers leverage in their business relationships that extends far beyond simple supplier-customer dynamics. Some alewives become wealthy enough to own property, extend credit, and participate in local politics in ways that would be impossible in other occupations. Prostitutes, though their presence might not be openly acknowledged, represent another category of women who frequent taverns, providing services that are simultaneously condemned by official morality and tolerated as practical necessities. Their relationships with tavern keepers, local authorities, and customers create complex webs of mutual dependence and exploitation that reflect broader contradictions in medieval attitudes towards sexuality, morality, and women's economic agency. Religious women nuns traveling between convents, female pilgrims on spiritual journeys, or widows who've adopted religious lifestyle occupy a special category that commands theoretical respect while creating practical complications. Their presence reminds everyone of official Christian morality, potentially dampening the tavern's more secular entertainments while simultaneously providing opportunities for displays of piety that might impress other customers or local authorities. The conversation patterns reveal how women's voices function within tavern social dynamics. Women speak differently when addressing male customers versus other women, modulating their tone, content, and manner to match social expectations while still conveying necessary information. They've mastered the art of saying what they mean without saying what they think, using indirect communication strategies that allow them to maintain relationships while protecting themselves from the consequences of being too direct or challenging. Marriage negotiations and romantic relationships often play out in tavern settings, where young people can meet outside the formal constraints of family supervision. These interactions follow complex protocols that balance personal desires with family expectations, economic considerations, and social propriety. A serving woman might receive marriage proposals from customers, but her decision involves calculating not just personal attraction, but financial security, social status, and family obligations that extend far beyond individual preference. Widows represent a unique category of women who've achieved relative independence through tragedy. A widow who inherits her husband's business, property, or trade connections might find herself with unprecedented autonomy, able to make decisions about her life and finances that would be impossible for most medieval women. However, this independence comes with constant pressure to remarry, both from family members who want to control her resources and from a society that views unmarried women as fundamentally problematic. The economic relationships between women and taverns extend beyond simple employment, as women often serve as informal credit agents, matchmakers, and information brokers within their communities. A tavern keeper's wife might arrange marriages, extend loans to struggling families, or serve as a confidential advisor to women facing domestic problems. These roles create networks of mutual obligation and support that operate parallel to official social structures. Historians still argue whether medieval women had more or less agency than their modern counterparts in certain spheres, but watching the women in this tavern navigate their complex social environment reveals a sophisticated understanding of power dynamics, risk management, and strategic thinking. They've developed survival skills that allow them to thrive in a world that officially considers them inferior while practically depending on their labor, intelligence, and social contributions to maintain the fabric of community life. The relationship between Christianity and tavern culture creates one of medieval society's most fascinating contradictions, as these establishments serve simultaneously as spaces of moral concern and social necessity. You witness this tension played out nightly as priests drink alongside their parishioners, religious pilgrims share tables with questionable characters, and Christian morality competes with the practical realities of hospitality, commerce, and human nature in an atmosphere thick with ale fumes and moral ambiguity. The local priest, when he appears, occupies a complex position that reflects the broader challenges facing medieval Christianity. He might condemn excessive drinking from the pulpit on Sunday, then appear at the tavern on Tuesday to conduct business, gather information about his parishioners, or simply enjoy human companionship that his clerical isolation otherwise denies him. His presence changes the room's dynamic, conversations become more guarded, behavior moderates slightly, and everyone becomes acutely aware of the gap between Christian ideals and daily reality. Religious festivals create particularly interesting dynamics, as the tavern often serves as the unofficial venue for celebrations that the church sanctions but cannot fully control. Christmas festivities, harvest thanksgivings, and Saints' Day observances blend sacred and secular elements in ways that would make modern religious authorities uncomfortable. The same building that hosts morning prayers might host evening revelries that would scandalize proper Christian sensibilities, yet both activities are considered essential parts of community religious life. Pilgrims represent mobile Christianity, carrying their faith from place to place while depending on tavern hospitality for survival. Their presence reminds everyone of religious obligations, while simultaneously demonstrating that even the most devout believers need food, shelter, and human companionship. The stories they tell blend spiritual experiences with practical travel advice, creating narratives that sanctify the very journey that requires them to frequent establishments that official morality views with suspicion. The tavern keeper navigates these religious tensions with practiced skill, maintaining relationships with local clergy while serving customers whose behavior might not meet strict Christian standards. This requires a delicate balance, showing appropriate respect for religious authority while protecting the commercial interests that depend on providing services that aren't always morally pristine. The successful tavern keeper learns to compartmentalize, treating religious and commercial obligations as separate but equally important aspects of community responsibility. Religious imagery in taverns reflects this complex relationship, as crosses, saints' images, and biblical references appear alongside more secular decorations. These symbols serve multiple functions. They demonstrate the establishment's Christian credentials, provide comfort to religious travelers, and offer protection against accusations of promoting immoral behavior. However, they also create ironic contrasts when displayed in environments where the behavior they're supposed to inspire is regularly ignored. The timing of religious observances, affects tavern operations in ways that reveal the practical challenges of maintaining Christian practices in commercial settings. Sunday restrictions on work and commerce mean that taverns must balance respect for religious law with the reality that travelers need food and shelter regardless of the calendar. Fast days create opportunities for taverns to offer special meals while testing the limits of what constitutes acceptable religious observance versus commercial necessity. Confession and absolution create interesting dynamics when priest and parishioner share not just spiritual relationships, but commercial ones. The priest who hears confessions about tavern misbehavior might also depend on the tavern keeper for meals, lodging, or business arrangements. This overlap between spiritual and temporal authority creates complex relationships where religious guidance must coexist with practical interdependence. Religious music and storytelling in taverns demonstrate how Christian culture adapts to secular environments. Biblical stories become entertainment, hymns transform into drinking songs, and religious themes provide material for performances that educate, inspire, and amuse simultaneously. The line between sacred and profane entertainment becomes blurred in ways that reflect medieval Christianity's pervasive influence on all aspects of cultural expression. The treatment of religious minorities, Jews, Muslims, or adherents to older pagan traditions in tavern settings reveals both the exclusionary and inclusive aspects of medieval Christian society. While official policies might restrict or forbid interaction with non-Christians, the practical needs of commerce often create situations where religious differences are temporarily overlooked in favor of mutual economic benefit. These interactions occur in spaces like taverns where official oversight is limited and practical necessities take precedence over theological purity. Moral instruction in taverns takes forms that would surprise modern religious educators, as customers learn Christian values through cautionary tales, moral examples, and peer pressure rather than formal teaching. The consequences of sin are visible in the broken lives of tavern regulars, while examples of Christian virtue appear in acts of charity, hospitality, and forgiveness that occur within these supposedly immoral environments. The economics of religious obligation affect tavern operations as tithing, charity, and religious donations compete with commercial spending for customers' limited resources. The tavern keeper might contribute to church-building projects or provide free meals to religious travelers, balancing profit motives against community expectations and spiritual obligations that extend beyond simple business calculations. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were fundamentally compatible or incompatible with Christian morality, but observing the daily interactions between religious and secular life in these establishments reveals a more complex reality. Christianity doesn't simply condemn or approve of tavern culture, it adapts to it, influences it, and is influenced by it in ways that reflect the broader challenges of maintaining spiritual ideals within the messy realities of human social and economic life. The result is a form of practical Christianity that acknowledges human weakness while providing frameworks for managing it, creating communities where moral ideals and practical necessities coexist in tension that generates both spiritual growth and social stability in ways that pure moral instruction alone could never achieve. The harsh realities of medieval health and hygiene assert themselves most dramatically in the close quarters of tavern life, where the combination of crowded conditions, limited sanitation, and the constant flow of travelers creates a perfect breeding ground for diseases that would terrify modern medical professionals. You begin to understand that surviving a night in a medieval tavern requires not just social skills and financial resources, but a kind of biological fortitude that speaks to the remarkable adaptability of human immune systems in an age before antibiotics, antiseptics, or even basic understanding of disease transmission. The air quality alone would challenge modern respiratory systems, thick with wood smoke, cooking fumes, and the exhalations of dozens of people crowded into spaces designed for far fewer occupants. Everyone here has adapted to breathing what amounts to a low-grade, toxic atmosphere, their lungs blackened by constant smoke exposure that contributes to the persistent coughs, shortened lifespans, and respiratory ailments that characterize medieval life. The irony is that the smoke actually provides some protection against insects and airborne pathogens, creating an inadvertent form of fumigation that medieval people appreciate without understanding. Personal hygiene practices reflect a complex relationship with cleanliness that balances practical limitations against social expectations and medical beliefs. The idea that bathing might be dangerous to health isn't just superstition, it's based on observation that people who bathe frequently sometimes get sick, though the correlation has more to do with contaminated water sources and seasonal temperature changes than with cleanliness itself. Most people clean themselves with dry methods, brushing their hair, changing their linen undergarments when possible, and using herbs or perfumes to mask odors rather than eliminate them. The shared eating and drinking vessels create constant opportunities for disease transmission, as cups, bowls, and utensils pass from person to person without any sterilization beyond occasional rinsing in water that might be cleaner than the items being washed, or might not be. The practice of sharing trencher bread means that multiple people are eating from surfaces that have absorbed juices, crumbs, and whatever microorganisms the previous diners contributed to the mix. Skin conditions are so common that they're barely remarked upon, as flea bites, lice infestations, and various rashes create a constant background of itching and scratching that punctuates every conversation. The bedding situation guarantees that you'll share your sleeping space with insects that view human guests as convenient food sources, and the lack of effective treatments means that everyone learns to live with parasites as permanent, unwelcome companions. The water supply represents one of the most dangerous aspects of medieval tavern life, as sources that appear clean might be contaminated with human waste, animal remains, or other pollutants that cause dysentery, typhoid, or other waterborne diseases. The preference for ale over water isn't just cultural, it's a survival strategy based on the understanding that fermented beverages are generally safer than untreated water, though the mechanisms behind this safety aren't scientifically understood. Wound care and injury treatment rely on folk remedies, religious faith, and the kind of practical experience that comes from dealing with frequent accidents in an age where sharp tools, open fires, and dangerous working conditions create constant opportunities for injury. The tavern keeper might maintain a supply of herbs, honey, or other substances believed to have healing properties, but infection remains a constant threat that can turn minor cuts into life-threatening conditions. The concept of contagion exists in a primitive form, as people observe that certain diseases seem to spread from person to person, but the understanding of transmission mechanisms is confused with supernatural explanations, astrological influences, and moral judgments about the victim's character. This creates inconsistent responses to disease outbreaks. Sometimes people flee from infected areas, sometimes they gather for communal prayers that actually increase transmission rates. Dental health is universally poor, as the combination of coarse food, limited cleaning methods, and the absence of professional dental care creates a population where tooth loss, decay, and chronic pain are normal parts of adult life. The prevalence of dental problems affects nutrition, speech, and social interaction in ways that modern people can barely imagine, creating a cascade of health issues that compound over time. Mental health challenges are understood through religious or supernatural frameworks that blame demonic possession, divine punishment, or astrological influences for conditions that modern medicine would recognize as depression, anxiety, or other psychological disorders. The social isolation, physical hardship, and constant uncertainty of medieval life create perfect conditions for mental health problems, but the available treatments rely more on prayer, herbal remedies, and community support than on systematic therapeutic approaches. The seasonal pattern of disease outbreaks affects tavern operations and customer behavior in ways that create cyclical periods of prosperity and crisis. Winter brings respiratory ailments, spring brings digestive problems from eating preserved foods that might be borderline spoiled, summer brings insect-borne diseases, and autumn brings harvest-related injuries and the stress of preparing for winter hardships. Child mortality rates are so high that families don't fully invest emotionally in children until they've survived their first few years, creating social attitudes toward childhood and parenting that reflect the harsh biological realities of medieval life. The children you see in taverns are survivors who've already beaten odds that would be unacceptable in modern society, yet they face continued risks that will determine whether they reach adulthood with their health intact. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more or less healthy than modern populations when lifestyle factors are considered. But sitting in this tavern, surrounded by coughing, scratching, limping representatives of medieval humanity, you gain profound appreciation for modern medicine, sanitation, and the luxury of expecting to survive minor illnesses and injuries that routinely killed our ancestors. The resilience of people who lived and thrived under these conditions speaks to human adaptability that's both inspiring and sobering. As dawn begins to creep through the small windows of the tavern, casting pale light across the smoke-stained walls and sleeping forms scattered throughout the common room, you prepare for the morning ritual of departure that marks the end of your brief membership in this temporary community. The sounds of awakening fill the air, coughs, groans, the rustle of straw mattresses, and the gradual resumption of conversation as travelers assess their condition after a night of medieval hospitality and whatever sleep they manage to achieve, despite the snoring, scratching, and general discomfort of communal accommodation. The tavern keeper appears with practiced efficiency, already calculating accounts, assessing the previous night's success, and preparing for the day's business. Their demeanor shifts from the evening's hospitality to morning's practicality as they collect final payments, settle outstanding tabs, and ensure that departing guests haven't accidentally or intentionally acquired any tavern property during their stay. This isn't personnel, it's the daily routine of someone who depends on successful guest relations for survival while protecting their business interests from the casual theft that represents constant temptation in an age when small items can mean the difference between comfort and hardship. Your fellow travelers emerge from the night's rest in various states of readiness, some clearly accustomed to tavern life, and others bearing the glazed expression of people who've discovered that medieval accommodation doesn't live up to romantic expectations. The merchant counts his coins and checks his pack, the pilgrims gather their staffs and adjust their cloaks, and the local laborers prepare for another day of work that will eventually bring them back to these same seats for another evening of ale and conversation. The morning meal, if you choose to purchase it, consists of bread, ale, and whatever remains from last night's cooking that can be safely consumed after sitting overnight in conditions that would horrify modern health inspectors. The bread might be fresh if you're lucky, or it might be yesterday's loaves that have achieved the consistency of edible stone. The ale remains the safest beverage option, though your head might already be protesting the cumulative effects of an evening spent drinking fermented beverages with alcohol content that varies according to the brewer's skill and the ingredients' quality. The farewell rituals reveal the complex social bonds that form quickly in these environments of shared vulnerability and mutual dependence. Addresses are exchanged, though with limited literacy and unreliable postal systems, these connections might never be renewed. Promises to meet again are made with genuine sincerity, though the harsh realities of medieval travel make such reunions more hopeful than probable. Information is shared about road conditions, weather prospects, and hazards that might affect other travelers' journeys, creating a network of mutual assistance that extends beyond the tavern's walls. The economic settlements of departure require careful attention, as morning clarity reveals the full cost of evening hospitality. The tavern keeper's accounting might surprise you with charges for services you don't remember requesting, or with credits for entertainment value you provided without realizing it. Disputes are possible but rarely productive, as your reputation for future travel depends on maintaining good relationships with tavern keepers who communicate with each other about difficult customers. Packing your belongings requires checking for damage, theft, or the acquisition of unwanted passengers in the form of fleas, lice, or other insects that consider travelers convenient transportation to new feeding grounds. Your clothing needs inspection for tears, stains, or wear that might affect your appearance and safety during continued travel. Your pack must be reorganized to accommodate any new purchases, trades, or gifts acquired during your tavern stay. The morning light reveals the tavern's true character, stripped of the romantic ambiance that flickering candles and flowing ale created the previous evening. The floors are littered with rushes that need changing, the walls show stains and damage that darkness concealed, and the general atmosphere suggests a place where survival takes priority over comfort or cleanliness. Yet there's something honest about this morning revelation. The tavern has served its purpose, providing shelter, food, and human connection in exchange for fair payment and reasonable behavior. Your departure preparations include consulting with other travelers about route options, weather conditions, and safety considerations that might affect your journey. The collective wisdom of experienced travelers provides information that no formal travel guide could offer. though the reliability of this advice depends on the source's knowledge, honesty, and sobriety. Road conditions can change rapidly, and information that was accurate yesterday might be dangerously obsolete today. The physical act of leaving requires navigating through a space that's becoming increasingly busy as the day's business begins. New travelers arrive seeking breakfast and information, local customers appear for morning ale, and the tavern staff begins the daily routine of cleaning, restocking, and preparing for another cycle of hospitality. Your temporary membership in this community expires with your departure, though the memories and experiences will travel with you. The final moments before stepping back into the uncertain world of medieval travel carry a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief at escaping the smoke, crowds, and questionable hygiene of tavern life, but apprehension about returning to the dangers and uncertainties of the road. The tavern represents safety, however imperfect, while the world beyond its walls offers both opportunity and risk in measures that no traveler can predict or control. Historians still argue whether medieval taverns were primarily beneficial or exploitative institutions, but as you prepare to leave this microcosm of medieval society, you understand that they served essential functions that no other institutions could provide. They offered temporary refuge in a dangerous world, created spaces for social and economic interaction, and provided the kind of human connection that makes survival possible in an age when isolation often meant death. The door closes behind you with the same heavy thud that welcomed you the previous evening, but now you carry with you the knowledge of what it means to be a medieval traveler dependent on the hospitality of strangers, the wisdom of understanding social dynamics that determine survival, and the appreciation for human resilience that allows communities to flourish under conditions that would challenge modern endurance. The tavern remains behind, ready to offer the same complex mixture of comfort and challenge to the next weary traveler who seeks shelter in a world where safety is temporary and community is precious. As you walk away, the sounds of the tavern fade into the morning air, but the experience remains, with you a glimpse into a world where human needs and social dynamics created institutions that served their purpose with remarkable effectiveness, despite conditions that would seem impossible to modern sensibilities. The medieval tavern, with all its flaws and dangers, represents human ingenuity in creating spaces where survival becomes possible and where the journey between destinations becomes manageable through shared resources, mutual support, and the simple recognition that we all need shelter from the storms of existence. The road ahead stretches toward your destination, but you carry with you the knowledge that when darkness falls and you need shelter again, there will be another tavern waiting, another temporary community ready to welcome you into its complex embrace of commerce, hospitality, and human connection. The cycle continues, as it has for centuries, providing the infrastructure that makes travel possible and communities viable, in a world where individual survival depends on collective cooperation and mutual understanding. The sun climbs higher in the sky, warming your face as you walk away from the tavern that briefly sheltered you from the night's darkness. Behind you, the sounds of morning activity grow fainter, the creak of cartwheels, the murmur of conversation, the distant clatter of wooden bowls being cleared from tables. Ahead lies your destination, whatever it might be, but the memory of wood smoke and human warmth lingers in your clothes and in your mind. There's something profound about this moment of transition, standing between the known comfort of the tavern and the unknown challenges of the road. You understand now that medieval travel wasn't just about getting from one place to another, it was about navigating a complex network of human relationships, economic transactions, and social expectations that turned every journey into a series of small adventures and temporary communities. The tavern keeper's final nod of farewell, the shared glance with a fellow traveler heading in the same direction, the weight of your pack settling comfortably on your shoulders, these small details create a sense of continuity that connects you to centuries of travelers who've made similar journeys, sought similar shelter, and found similar comfort in the simple human act of sharing food and warmth with strangers. Sleep comes easily now, as the morning sun warms your face and the gentle rhythm of walking carries you toward your next destination. The tavern fades behind you, but its lessons remain. That survival depends on community, that hospitality is a form of insurance we all pay into and hope to collect from, and that human connection can flourish even in the most challenging circumstances. Rest well, traveler, and dream of the warm hearth that awaits you at the end of your next day's journey.